Hey everyone, let's go live right quick in Instagram as well. All right, how you doing? Okay, so here's what we're going to do tonight. We are going to take a look at, talked about focusing on C-level leaders. We're talking about the, uh, my draw towards high impact decision making, and honestly, one of the firms that are arguably still the greatest to do it is McKinsey. Listen, they they're there. They're there. All right. So what we're gonna do is two things. We're gonna go ahead and cover how Starbucks has done it unofficially. A lot of consultants and academicians and people who they can't we can't necessarily say that they intentionally applied the McKinsey 7S framework, but in business schools and just in general, you can take the framework and apply it to what they decided to do. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on that, and then a little bit later on Twitch, same stream. Not going to cut it off for some of the other platforms. I will read the just in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Day. I will read his speech, "The Other America." All right. So if you want to stick around for that, feel free to do so. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. The first thing that I want us to understand is McKinsey. It's one of those strategic management firms that have always, I don't know if it's always, but they've been in the top three for the longest. I know it's McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group. I wonder if Bain is still in the running. Let's see. I'm going to look it up right now, actually. Top three management consulting firms. It could be Deloitte. All right. Well, we've got Deloitte, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst & Young they have here as far as professional service firms. Okay, well, by revenue. Ooh, McKinsey. Did McKinsey get knocked off? I don't know. I don't know. That don't seem right to me. McKinsey, Boston, the MBB. That's what I remember. Okay, and then the two big, and two from the big four, which is Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Okay, I think that PricewaterhouseCoopers. I always mess them up. But yeah, I think that McKinsey is still in the running, honestly. In the past, I did work for Boston Consulting Group, so that's not the reason why I know this, but it was cool having known all of that and then having done work with them with some of their content strategy. It was kind of cool to be able to kind of level up their employer branding, which is a whole other thing. We talk about that at another time. All right, so McKinsey's got like three very famous frameworks. They've got the 7S framework, is what we're going to talk about tonight. They've got the 3 horizons of growth, and then they've got the MEIS principle, which is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. We can break those down and talk about those a little bit later. Let's focus on the 7S framework, right? So it's just a strategic framework that is for organizational effectiveness. Remember, we're talking about high impact, right? High impact decision making here. To have high impact decision making, you need to have a tried and true proven strategy, or at least a framework to guide you, and then the framework can be flexible. And so it's great for organizational effectiveness and helps to ensure all critical elements of an organization are properly aligned. And this is why it's important, as I think I watched a recent video from Christo who talked about, especially creatives, they should be going deep as far as their expertise. But then there are some that need to be able to go wide, to have a general understanding, but of a lot of components. C-suite people would be a part of that. With that knowledge, as he put it, they are considered dangerous people, meaning very competitive, highly competitive people, because being at a high level, you need to understand multiple things from an aerial view. And so here are the 7 independent factors that allow these critical elements of an organization to be properly aligned. The first one is strategy, right? So it's the plan that's devised to maintain and build competitive advantage. That's the first thing. Usually when you think of strategy, think of, I think of Michael Porter. And basically what he says is the essence of strategy is being able to say no to like 99% of everything to be able to have a singular focus. But it's also about competitive advantage. So if you don't have that, and he has a framework too, it's called like the 5 Ps, I believe. Maybe I'm thinking about marketing. Y'all forgive me. I should know some of this. But the point is, strategy, got to have that and I don't really like to synonymize strategy with plan, but let's just go with that right now. It's just a plan that's devised to maintain and build competitive advantage. So when you think of strategy, think of competitive advantage, right? How do we get the edge up over our competitors? The next is structure, right? So it's how the organization is arranged, and that could be by hierarchy, reporting lines, and teams. As a matter of fact, let's map some of this out. Let's do that, y'all. I'm going to open up, I don't know, I think Apple has a free tool here that we can use. And we can just start kind of writing some of this out right quick. Let's see. Never really used it, so should be interesting. And I'm wondering, I'd be very curious to see if it has an infinity canvas. I think it does actually. So it's going to be interesting as well. Okay. So here's what we're going to do, y'all. If you just want to bear with me for a little bit. I'm going to take a look at sharing my screen. Give me 1 second here so that we can go and just kind of make some of this visual tonight. All right. They're not being fancy or anything. We're just going to really use this to break down what we're talking about here. All right. Okay. See if I can find you guys. And boom. All right. All right, cool. Now I wonder if I shorten the window, I guess that impacts like how much you guys see as well, right? Yeah, it kind of does. All right, I can do that for now until I get like a third monitor. All right, so the first S, let's talk about it, is strategy. Okay, so that's the first S that we're using here. And with strategy, we talked about, needing to focus on the competitive advantage. Okay, so that's the first S. The second S would be structure, right? And then with structure, as you can see, there we go. With structure, it's how the organization is arranged. So that can be based on hierarchy, it can be based on reporting lines, based on teams. And you probably have seen different kinds of structures before. You've seen flattened hierarchies like organizational flow charts, right? You've seen hierarchical flow charts. You have seen linear. However, the structure is, it's really just understanding that. And then the next one, right? Remember, we're talking about the 7 S's here. Systems. Systems are the daily activities and processes that staff use to get the job done. Now, if anybody is familiar with the business model canvas, when I was a freelancer over a decade ago now, that was like the first model that I used when I was exposed to it in the creative problem solving conference, first exposed to like the long tail method. And it just blew my mind, understanding that there's a more effective way of building a business versus using a canvas versus a business plan, which was very interesting. So when I think of daily activities, one of the things in the business model canvas is talking about key activities, right? And so that's something to keep in mind. The next one is shared values. All right, so with shared values, think of the organization's core values and their guiding principles. Okay. Some people also call those superordinate goals. Next, we've got skills. Skills. Now, with skills, the capabilities and competencies that exist within the company. All right, that's what skills are about. This is very similar to when we were talking about, I don't know if you guys remember, when we were talking about decision making, maybe a couple of weeks ago now. And one of the things that you had to consider was the capabilities of the team, right? So skills is super important. Next is style, right? You wouldn't probably think that style is in there, but style is the leadership. Okay, it's the leadership style and organizational culture, right? So that's where a lot of EQ comes in, to being able to understand people. And then the last is people themselves. We call that staff. All right. And this is the people, their backgrounds, their mindsets, and their competencies. So the McKinsey 7S framework, if we can, let me see if I can just pop that right here. So the McKinsey 7S framework. So this is where we are focusing on the 7 S's, and these are it. These right here. All right. Strategy, structure, system, shared values, skills. I've got skills twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's take the skills out. 7. All right. I guess you can't have enough. Can't have too many skills, right? Okay. So what you want to do is using this framework to diagnose organizational misalignment. So that's one of the keys here that we want to actually take a look at, is anytime there's any sort of misalignment in the organization, anytime there is a need to guide change management and strategic implementation. Change management is a big thing, by the way. I'll just shorten it. And then also to ensure improvements in one area don't conflict with another area. All right. So we're going to probably put here, if we can, probably make it, call it like self-contained improvements, if that's the word, or contained improvements, just for the sake of like, and you guys will know what I mean by that. All right. Okay. So this is why you would use these things. Change management, by the way, is huge. Why? Because you might have a vision. This has happened to me in the past. You might have a vision and you're like, yo, this is a really, really great idea. This is something that we should be focusing on and that we should do. And for whatever reason, even though it is a direction, right? You found the misalignment and you found a way, right? You got the strategy and maybe even the systems to fix it, to solve the problem. You don't have the buy-in. And so if you don't have the buy-in, y'all, not having the buy-in means that you can have a great plan, but if the plan isn't great, if the people aren't buying into the plan, then it's going to be very difficult for change to happen. And this is honestly why the bigger the company, the more meetings that you have, because you have departments upon, sub-departments and cultures and subcultures. And it's change management is people management. Oftentimes people think of, this idea that it's changing a system. Well, people are the system. All right. And so that's why change management is a very nuanced thing, and why oftentimes, in order for that to happen, you got to bring somebody from the outside in. It's just like, for those of you that might be parents, you can tell your child the same thing over and over again, and then they hear it from somebody else and it clicks. And you're just like, but you have to eat the humble pie as a parent or guardian and say, you know what, at least they got it. So bring somebody else in. Okay. So 7 S's. So this is what Starbucks did. Okay. Now this is one of the most popular uh, case studies that have been used. So, as you know, or if you don't know, Starbucks was founded in 1971 in Seattle. All right, and it grew from that single store that was in Seattle, selling premium coffee beans to a global coffee house. And with this global coffee house chain, it just kind of spread to thousands of outlets worldwide, right? So this is where we've got in the mid 2000s, so around like maybe 2008. I know it's weird to say mid 2000s. You would think it would mean like 2050, but no, it's like the mid 2000s is like before, in the middle of like 2000, 2010. Interesting choice of words, but it is what it is. Mid 2000s, Starbucks experienced rapid expansion, but they subsequently faced some challenges. Um, because there's a lot of market saturation that's going on now. There's brand dilution, and most importantly, or maybe the most impactful thing was the 2008 economic downturn. That was specific in really hitting large, franchises like Starbucks. I mean, even us, right? So Howard Schultz, very interestingly enough, many people may not know this. Howard Schultz actually worked for Starbucks, and then he left because he had this great idea after traveling to, I think it was like to Italy. One day I'll get the story like more accurate than what I'm going to tell you, but I'm just kind of paraphrasing it. Went overseas, went to Europe, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, this is what coffee community around coffee should look like, should feel like." He comes back. Starbucks was like, no, we're not going to do that. So he says, okay, well, I'll open my own. And so he does, and this is the beauty. He doesn't burn any bridges. He builds his own vision, and he becomes successful. And long story short, he comes back I think he might have even bought out Starbucks. I think there was an agreement. I'll get the story right for y'all, but the point is the relationship was still intact. So even though their visions were different, he decided to execute on his vision, which was cool. And then he outperformed the Starbucks back then. And then he came back as CEO, y'all. He came back as CEO. Does that sound familiar? It's not like a Steve Jobs situation. The difference with Steve Jobs is they ousted him. They pushed that man out. But there's some people, like, no matter what they do, no matter what they touch, it's just going to grow because of the mindset that they have, maybe even the network and their ability to just have a vision and then rally people around that vision. So even though they may not have the technical skills, they have the people who can do it. Some people, they're born with it. And of course there are things that they're learning and, that they hone in on, but man, it's a gift. So anyway, Schultz comes back. Okay. And he's returning as CEO in 2008 around this time. And Starbucks undertook a significant realignment to revitalize its brand. And it also took this realignment to improve operational efficiency and also to focus on the customer experience. So if we want to take a look now at Starbucks, and I guess, so I said a mouthful there. This is not going to be fancy. We're just going to just put Starbucks on this side here. Starbuckies. And just use some of the same shapes. So the things that Starbucks now is focusing on are three things. The first one is revitalizing their brand. The second one is their operational efficiency. And then the third one is their customer experience. Okay. So these three things are what they realize, okay, this is what we need to do in order to save our company. Okay. I'm not going to get caught up in the colors, y'all. I can get caught up in colors. But what I want to do is, though, I probably want to just explain it just a little bit more. So revitalize, ops efficiency, and CX, we know, is customer experience. All right. So what do they do? Well, the first thing that they do is they begin with a strategy. Now, remember, this is unofficial. Unofficially, they use the McKinsey 7S framework because there is no documented source that says that they said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to hire or use, this framework and do it ourselves. No. So what's happening is for oftentimes many case studies like this, certain frameworks are being reverse engineered, so it's being applied to historical experiences versus the historical experience explaining uh, what has actually happened, like they actually use the framework. All right. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's, like I said, it's an unofficial application. All right. So when it comes to strategy, what they ended up doing was they decided. So remember, let's define what strategy is again. So remember, it's a company's plan to achieve a sustained competitive advantage. All right. And to meet organizational goals. So we're looking at competitive advantage here, y'all. Okay. Competitive advantage. And what they did were a few things. The first thing was they decided to, let's see if we can put a little connector here. Is this actually going to connect? No, this doesn't connect, y'all. Hold on. I don't know if there's any like if any of the actual, no, I don't think they connect. That's all right. We'll just use like shapes in order to connect all this stuff. All right. That's what we'll do. All right. So for strategy, what they ended up doing, y'all, the first part is having premium coffee and what's called a third place. Remember, I told you Schultz went out. He went out to Europe. And when he came back, he's like, listen, we're missing the whole point of why people come to these coffee shops. So Starbucks' core strategy now, as they were planning this out, it began to center around providing a premium coffee experience, which they've had, but creating the third place, which is beyond home and work. It's the next place that you would go after you leave home, you go to work. What's the next place that you would go? For kids, it would probably be the playground or something like that, right? Or the park. So think of this as like the third place for adults. This would be the coffee shop where customers can relax or they can work, they can socialize, all right? So that's the first thing that they did. So I'm just gonna type that out here. So premium coffee and the third place. Right. The next thing is they needed to diversify their products. Remember we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Steve Jobs, what he actually did was he simplified the product diversification. He was just like, no, we have too much. We're not doing this. Let's slash down like 80% of our product line or product lines. Here, over time, Starbucks expanded its product lines. So of course, Apple did that too over time, but that's the goal. The goal was to expand versus reduce. So now they've got teas, they've got food items, ready to drink bottled beverages, and then its loyalty program and mobile app also became strategic goals to deepen customer engagement as well, right? So we could probably add here product diversification. The next thing that they did was global expansion with local adaptation. What does that mean? So Starbucks continued to pursue global growth, but adapted the store formats and product offerings to local tastes. So it emphasized cultural integration. You can probably, if you've never been to a Starbucks outside of the US, you can see that oftentimes the formatting is the same, but they would integrate certain elements of the actual place that they're in, whether it was, I don't know, I've never been to Dubai, at least not yet, but if there's a Starbucks in Dubai, pretty sure that there would be elements over there in the UAE or UAE, and they would have, basically this idea of it not feeling, I think this is key, right? So that it doesn't feel like it's just American. Right? It was founded in America, but it's not just an American franchise anymore. They wanted to feel global. And so in order to do that, they had to tap into cultural integration. So I'm going to put here, like we're going to go wide, global expansion, but then we're also going to adapt to the local. Oh, I think it actually spelled it right for me. to the local culture. All right. So we've got these three areas for strategy. Beautiful. Now, under Schultz's new leadership, what the company started to do is shut down underperforming stores. They refocused on core coffee products and then invested in barista training. And so the strategic reset kind of emphasized quality control over blind expansion. And that's super important because once again, it's like, okay, we're going to go big, we're going to go wide, we're going to go global. Yeah, but how's the quality? Remember the premium coffee and the third place experience, right? This was super important here. Okay. So this is where we've got their strategy. The next thing is, and I could probably copy all of these, is structure. So remember, just to remind you, the structure is how an organization is arranged. So whether if it's hierarchy, it's reporting lines, departmentalization. And so one of the things that they did was they focused on what we would call functional and geographic segmentation. So their structure, Starbucks structure, is partially functional. So kind of think of like finance, marketing, HR, but it's combined with geographic divisions. America or the Americas, China, Asia Pacific, think of EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And they kind of had this like matrix-like structure to facilitate both corporate oversight and then local market responsiveness. So once again, it's kind of tied to the global expansion and local adaptation here. So let's actually change this. Different color here. And the first thing that they did was, we can call it functional and geo-segmentation. All right. The next thing that your favorite coffee shop, well, it's not everybody's favorite coffee shop, but field support and regional autonomy. So what they did was had store managers have a degree of autonomy in customizing the store experience. And this was then supported by regional managers who ensure the brand consistency. It really ties back to this. I'm probably going to start drawing some arrows here because in order to be global but still be local, it's so funny. I think about the movie Up in the Air, talk about global. If you ever get a chance to watch the movie, it's pretty good. And this is what's happening, right? They're looking to give this level of autonomy. So actually, let's call it field support and regional autonomy. Why? Because just as much as the customers wanted to feel like it's their third place, staff needs to as well. Now we didn't get to staff just yet, but there's a sense of ownership, there's also then a sense of pride of where you work. And so having that level of autonomy is very important. And then following store closures in 2008 and 2009, Starbucks streamlined reporting lines, and they established clearer accountability and reduced operational redundancies. So here is where there's a shift from rapid expansion, kind of like what I mentioned before, to operation. And remember, operational efficiency is one of the important tenets of this particular, where is it? Of them, right? Of what Starbucks did. And this would fall under misalignment. Okay. And well, arguably, it could also be contained improvements, but then we're going to call this, my fault, I think I missed that there. This is structure, okay? And then from strategy and structure, when focus on the system, and by the way, this isn't all linear, right? It doesn't all have to be linear, because you have to focus on where the problem lies, but you have to also consider all of the other areas as well, because they're all kind of interconnected with each other, right? But for sure, you're likely going to start with strategy. All right. But like if staff was the issue, you probably are not going to laboriously go through each one and then get to staff at the bottom versus kind of maybe looking at staff and then maybe even working your way up to structure. So, anywho, systems is next. And with systems, we've got, remember, so systems is processes, procedures used in daily ops. So think of IT systems, think of performance metrics, think of training programs. So they did a few things. One of the things that they did was, kind of mentioned it or alluded to it before, was barista training and customer service protocols. Really had to focus on that. So if you look at certain sources, like you'll see how religious they are, how rigorous they are with barista training and ensuring product consistency and high quality customer service. I remember, especially, there was a really huge situation that happened. This was like at the height, like this is when like racial tensions were pretty high. I think this was like 2015, 2016. Yeah, so this is way before George Floyd in 2020. And the way that they handled, I think it was, I could be messing my dates up, but anyway, but there was a very particular incident that happened that if they did not handle it the way that they did, it would have really marred the brand. And so I think that when it comes to customer support, they tend to do all right. Now, as of late, I don't know. I haven't been to Starbucks as of late. Tech integration. With tech integration, I don't know if you've ever used it before, but the Starbucks app, I still got some Starbucks money on my phone. I remember, and I kind of don't like how they changed it, but I get it. You have to kind of, you gotta go with what's working. But the original reward system, I don't know if anybody remembers. I think I still have my card. When my gold Starbucks card came in the mail, and it felt so elite. By the way, if anybody has the super rare edition of, I think it was a platinum, either a platinum or a gold Starbucks card, where you would have, I think they only had, let me see, rare edition Starbucks card. Limited edition. Yes, it was a limited edition, and it was called. I'm actually looking at it on eBay right now. This is, I think it was like back in 2015. It was around that time, and anyway, it was. I think it was all metal. I think, probably had to be all metal, but I'm not sure what kind of metal. I want to say it was gold, but anywho, hard to get your hands on at the time. And anyway, there was a time when you kind of wore this badge of honor because of having gone to Starbucks so many times, and racking up the reward points, and then finally getting that card in the middle, the tangible card. Now it's like anybody can, it's a little different now, but back then it just felt you can touch the reward, right? And I say all of that to say that when they changed the loyalty program, things kind of shifted a little bit. But, and honestly, that's probably when I had less incentive to go to, when they kind of started to shift the loyalty program. Some of you know what I'm talking about. But that's all a part of tech integration. The mobile app, the point of sale system that they were using, and even some core operational systems that track the transactions and then also personalize customer rewards. I know that they had this I think was always a part of the situation where you would have birthday rewards and things like that. Anyway, This is a part of their system. So you got barista training, you got tech integration, and then also they had the vertical integration that include sourcing the high quality coffee beans, because we're talking about, oh, we need premium beans, right? Here in this first one, it's like, well, how do you get that? Well, you need to have supply chain excellence. So let's put that in there. Supply chain excellence. And this is where they're monitoring ethical sourcing practices, and they call it the coffee and farmer equity, or CAFE, as an acronym, and also just managing global logistics, right? Because once again, if there's global expansion, you need to have global logistics so that there's not going to be a nightmare when it comes to not just having premium coffee, but even when we talk about operational efficiency, and also the tech integration that comes with managing your global expansion or your supply chain excellence. There's tech that goes into that as well. So you'd be surprised, like the supply chain tech is wild. All right. So then we go from systems to shared values. And with shared values, let's get a new color in here. I'm avoiding red for some reason. I don't know why. Shared values. Remember, it's the core values, the culture that guide the employee behavior and company decisions. All right. You can argue that this is probably even over strategy, right? This is probably where everything kind of is pulled together here, shared values. So their mission statement, which is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. There's that third place kind of speak there. That mission statement highlights its commitment to social responsibility and community. All right. So one of the things that you have to do, especially as a leader, is you have to, I don't want to say hammer, but you got to be very repetitive on making sure that people understand what your mission, what the vision is of the business, right? Why are you doing what you do? Right? It's super important, because there's going to be a time when somebody shows up like, man, why are we doing this again? The mission will be ingrained, right? Like when you go to the gym and you're working, like, why am I doing this again? And you have that, I don't know, poster on the wall. I don't have a poster on the wall, but you got a poster or in your mind of the image of what you see and how you see yourself, 18, 24, 36 months from now, right? Okay. So the other thing too, though, is Starbucks positioning itself as an inclusive, people-oriented organization. So it offers different benefits, healthcare, stock options. They call it the bean stock, by the way, to eligible employees, whom they also call partners. So they're very intentional. They just don't call their employees. They call them partners. It's very, very interesting. So we can call this inclusive culture. All right. With this inclusive culture, remember when I talked about when we hit on autonomy here, field support and regional autonomy, when employees, or in this case partners, also have that sense of ownership, and autonomy, like putting their own kind of pizzazz, their little razzle dazzle to the local or hyper local look and feel of, or maybe not hyper local feel of the Starbucks. They want to take ownership of it, right? So inclusive culture really makes a difference there. And you're not just doing that with, you can write, creatively on a chalkboard. No. We want you to also literally take stock in our company. All right. Which is very helpful in changing their mindset by even calling them partners and taking more ownership. So the last one, though, is shared values, right? So with shared values, they manifest in local community support, such as volunteer programs, philanthropic initiatives, environmental sustainability goals. So we would call that, under shared values, community engagement. All right. I think I said the last one is shared values. I meant the last one is community engagement. All right. 5. We're almost there, y'all. So then we have skills. So what is it? Remember, it's the capabilities and competencies that exist within the organization. So what skills are needed in order for, remember, the top, revitalizing the brand, focusing on operations efficiency and customer experience. So what should they be doing? Well, what capabilities do they need? Well, the core skills include everything from copy selection, roasting, brewing, delivering exceptional customer experiences. You see how it's top heavy on the barista, right? It's not managers. I mean, even the managers would know how to do these things. I've seen it before. There's a manager, and you couldn't even tell. I remember one time I was going into, man, this was years ago. It was downtown Miami, and I went in for the first time and got my coffee order, and then I don't even know if it was the same day, the next day. Might have been 2 days later. I came back in, and the barista remembered my order to the T, and I was like, wow. It's like that's super impressive. And then come to find out that they were also the manager. So they were on the front line just like with everybody else, but you can tell the way that they were moving and how they were able to kind of mobilize the rest of the team and kind of pick up, certain gaps or delegate, that they were definitely a manager. In order to do that, you got to kind of know, I would say, arguably, to be a great manager, you have to understand what the direct report does. And even if you don't do it, I mean, I think it's even better if you have done it before or have tasted what that's like. You have to have a deep understanding of what it is so that you can know how and the capabilities, the capacity that those that you are leading have in order to have some of these skills. So we'll call this copy expertise and customer experience or customer service. Call it customer service. The next one is, remember, with skills, we can consider this brand management. So Starbucks has developed strong branding and marketing capabilities, consistently translating its brand identity across regions. How do we know this? I don't know if y'all ever remembered me talking about Seth Godin. Well, for those of you that know me, I was on a Seth Godin kick for a long time, especially around like 2011 through maybe like 2016. And this definition of brand still sticks with me to this day. So he's like, a brand is, and this is essentially, it's not a logo. It's not anything that's artistic. It's a set of stories, expectations, memories, and relationships that would cause a person to choose a particular product or service over another time and time again. But it's those four elements: stories, the stories that not just that the brand portrays, the stories that the person, the customer, has in their mind about the brand, the product, the service, the expectations that the customer has, the memories that the customer has, the relationships that are built between the customer and the brand itself. So in essence, and all of that, if you had to boil down what a brand is a promise. And the stronger the promise that gives a reaction that's emotional and then delivering on the promise creates loyalty. So Starbucks has done this. They've done that with this third place. Now, I don't know if it's still the third. Things have changed when, they started putting the padlocks on the doors to the bathrooms and whatnot. And it was like, but times have changed. The point is, brand management is still, when you think of Starbucks, now I don't know if people think about it now as, I don't know. Some people think that if you go to a Starbucks and you open up your MacBook, you're pretentious. It's just one of those. Listen, many of us have seen pretentious people show up to Starbucks thinking that they're doing something when they're not really doing anything. I will say, I think one day I'll probably write about this. I have had 4 seasons in a Starbucks. I've been to Starbucks when I was homeless. Starbucks is taking care of me. I've been to Starbucks when I was a freelancer, just having random conversations with individuals, or they would hear me having a conversation with someone like, yo, I like what you're talking about. And then, so I've had business with Starbucks. I've also, I've got like 2 other, I had this outline written down somewhere. And then one day I was like, I'll talk about it. But yeah, I've had very interesting experiences in different phases of my life, and I would say that Starbucks has been the third place for me, um, which has been a very interesting experience. The last one here under skills. By the way, this is like we're boiling this down, right? Like this is a very boiled down version, but that's okay. We're gonna take this and maybe one day we can do a deeper dive. Is their successful implementation of mobile ordering, loyalty rewards, new product lines. We want to call that innovation and adaptability. I could just spell it. Capability, my capability of being able to spell adaptability. All right. Think of new product lines like Starbucks Reserve. Y'all remember when Starbucks Reserve came out? To this day, don't hate me, I've never had Starbucks Reserve. I've seen it. I was curious about it, but I've never really had it. Then I wasn't really a coffee drinker. I just stuck to my little chai, my little creme brulee situation during the winter season. But for like coffee drinkers, you probably coveted the Starbucks Reserve kind of product line there. But what those things do is that showcases Starbucks' skill in innovating within a competitive marketplace. Because at the end of the day, I mean, think about it, it's just coffee. Now you can't say that to anybody who's a Starbucks enthusiast or a coffee shop. Any kind of coffee enthusiast, they'd be like, "What are you talking? Just coffee? These are just coffee beans." And so that is a large part of what the brand is, right? The expectation that I have that when I show up, I'm going to get premium coffee. Now, don't get me wrong. There are other coffee shops that are around that are creating very similar third places, but you got to admit that for America, Starbucks was the spot that I think was the flagship franchise that introduced the third place for Americans, at least in my opinion. And now you have, more niche or boutique. I said niche, more niche coffee shops that, have just as premium coffee beans, and has that same kind of third place experience. And it's maybe closer, price might be comparable too, though. So, keep that in mind. All right. Style. We're almost done. Remember, style here, we're talking about leadership style. Okay. And remember, leadership style is all about, let's just use red. It's all about, well, it's two things. It's the leadership style and the organizational culture. All right. So it's the person or people in charge and the overall, let's say it's this mixture of their shared values, their behaviors, their mindset. It's like a mixture of this shared values, but it's not about the shared values. This is the style and how the shared values are actually executed. I hate to use the word, but it's the vibe. It's the vibe of the company. So Howard Schultz, his leadership approach, people consider him empathetic. They consider his visionary style had an emphasis on investing in employee well-being, maintaining strong ethics, focusing on product quality. This all starts from the top, okay? And you can see that from part of the strategy. Premium coffee, product diversification, looking at the structure, operational efficiency was important here, right? Okay, so he wasn't just all about this. There's some leaders that's all they care about, systems. As a matter of fact, you can argue that Tim Cook, when he became CEO, he didn't necessarily have to do much buy-in when it came to some of these other things. Now, remember, I don't know what happens behind closed doors, but what I do know is that when it came to them becoming a $1 trillion business, it's because they focused on the systems. There were things that they did. So think of like supply chain excellence. They focused less on, and a lot of the revenues didn't really come through the products as much as it did the software, the services, like Apple Health and um, the subscription services. These things is what really pushed them over. So anyway, I'm pretty sure once again, as CEO, you had to really be very articulate about how and intentional on how you are continuing to deliver the shared values, or to express those shared values throughout the company, perhaps reformatting the internal structure. I don't know if they had to do much because a lot of the groundwork was already done. But once again, I don't know what happened behind closed doors unless there's a case study that kind of, shows some of that stuff. But the point is, here, Howard Schultz, customer or employee well-being was a huge one. Strong ethics was another one. All right. So we're going to put here, I want to put Schultz. Shuttles. Oh my goodness. The other style we're looking at here is having open communication and a partner-focused culture. So this is like part of the organization now. So what they encouraged was an open door policy, fostering collaboration. So you had like regular staff meetings, coffee tastings, right, to help maintain a sense of community and passion for the product as well. So we can put, so it's like an open door policy. And remember, their employees were considered partners. All right. And then we have one more actually. The customer-centric mindset. So as charismatic and as employee-focused as Schultz was, I should say empathetic, not charismatic. There's a difference. So as empathetic as he was, and as much as he was investing in employee well-being, and that was clearly shown with the open door policy and having the employees having this partner-focused kind of culture here, you had to focus on the customers. So there's this customer-centric mindset where store managers and partners were empowered to solve customer problems and create moments of connection. That one moment I told you where it was like high racial tension and everything got de-escalated because of how they decided to work it. And I think if my memory serves me correctly, I think they shut down Starbucks. I think all of them to do a very specific training because of that one incident. Was it performative? I don't know. But you can argue that maybe it was, but listen, to shut down the operation, to focus on that don't sound performative to me. But the customer-centric mindset, reflecting on a service-oriented culture from the top down. It always comes from the top. All right. Last but not least, which we've already kind of been talking about it here, but the staff. The staff. All right. So with the staff, the employees and their general capabilities, mindsets, demographics, you've got, once again, this honing in on they are partners, not employees. Okay. So they call their workforce partners to instill a sense of ownership and empowerment. And then also by, not introducing, but having, certain packages or benefits like health insurance, tuition coverage, to help attract and to retain talent. I mean, that's super important. All right. It's one thing to say, oh, the door is open, we're partner focused. No, but to actually make it happen, you got to put your money where your mouth is. And that's what they did. There's also the diverse workforce. So they're actively promoting diversity and inclusion. So whether it's spanning age, gender, race, different backgrounds to reflect the global footprint. Okay. And then last but not least, They invest heavily in training programs. So I talked about it, even like when there's specific incidents, and they'll shut it down. Like, listen, we're doing training today. In order to improve, we need to hone in on skills, or we need to hone in on getting our mind, in the right place so that we can really deliver um, top quality to top quality service to our customers. So what that does is it fosters loyalty, it reduces turnover, which is, when you think about a barista, right? Like that kind of environment, it's traditionally a high turnover industry, right? Food and beverage is usually high turnover rates. So by doing that, in these training programs and career development pathways, they've developed that sense of loyalty. So emphasis on training and development. All right. So this is what they did. This is what they did. I want to zoom out here. And remember, so Starbucks, their focus was to revitalize their brand, focus on operations efficiency and customer experience. So the strategy was to make sure that their coffees, the coffee beans, were premium. If you have premium coffee, you got to have premium coffee beans, right? The sourcing has to be just right. And having this third place experience, right? That lends to the brand revitalization, right? The promise of having premium coffee, the promise of showing up and then there being, right? The expectation of there being community, right? Product diversification is another one. Global expansion and local adaptation. Some of these kind of overlap, right? There's a little customer service in the third place, operations efficiency, of course, with product diversification, and also global expansion and local adaptation. Structure. So you've got the functional and geographic segmentation. This ties into the global expansion and local adaptation. Choosing to focus from rapid expansion to operational efficiency. It's like, okay, why are we growing, but the quality isn't getting any better? All right. So let's start cutting down. Let's start shutting down some stores and really focus on customer experience. Let's start focusing on the premium coffee experience. Like, in order to do this, we can't keep growing and not having the right quality. Field support and regional autonomy. The other thing too here is, if you want buy-in, you got to make sure that, and also to have this local adaptation, that employees, they need to be able to make the store their own. The look and the feel, of course, needs to follow the brand guidelines and follow the policies in the franchise. But Miami needs to feel like Miami. Dubai needs to feel like Dubai, right? Dubai, forgive me if y'all don't have a Starbucks over there, because y'all might hate Starbucks. I don't know. Let's just assume that y'all got it over there too. Systems is next. Making sure that the supply chain excellence is on point, right? Ties back into coffee. Tech integration ties back into not necessarily this. I would say product diversification, barista training, customer service protocols. A lot of it, when you think about it, depending on what you're focusing on, a lot of it is going to be like here first. Because what they ended up doing was they didn't really expand as much during this time. They actually shrunk quite a bit. Okay. Then shared values, making sure that the mission was central. What was their mission again? Their mission was to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. It's beautiful. Ethical sourcing. Just can't go to another country and just ravage their farms and not pay them what they're worth, or just take it. It's got to be ethical. And I'm pretty sure that with that also comes with how it's actually being grown. And there's a lot, not just with the people, but the actual growing of the coffee as well. And, I don't know what the equivalent to like free range chicken is for coffee beans, but I would assume it's something that's very similar. Inclusive culture, community engagement, all of these are shared values. Okay, skills, lots of training. So baristas had to have an expertise in coffee and also in making customers feel like they were at home. Brand management, innovation, and adaptability. They're different things that need to happen. When we look at the skills part again, where we look at so like the loyalty rewards, new product lines. This is the innovation and adaptability piece. Okay. Because remember, it's the capabilities and competencies that exist within the organization. So it's not just the skills of people, but what's the skill? What's the capacity, the capability of the company itself? All right. So it's not just the person. Even though at the end of the day, like I said, all of this boils down to somebody has to do it until they don't, especially with AI taking, it's the surge of what's happening right now in the AI world. Any prompt engineers over there? It's a very interesting space, by the way. Okay, and style. So we looked at Howard Schultz's leadership approach. It's very empathetic, very customer centric, and that customer centrism then lend itself to the actual culture being that way and having this open door policy and making sure that their employees feel not just like employees, but also like partners, which then means specifically for the staff, there's this reminder that you are partners, you're not just employees. Making sure that the workforce was and is diverse. And then also continuous training and development of their partners. All right. So that's it. That's the McKinsey. That's the 7S, y'all. And it seems like a lot. And this is just honestly, this is just a high level overview, quite frankly. I think that when we look at a few of the outcomes here, some of the things that happened, and if you want to zoom out, and then let's take a look at what were some of the outcomes. So some of the outcomes were doesn't want to zoom in the way I want it to. Some of the outcomes were financial performance improved. Obviously, you're not doing all this to not make money. But there's also sustainable. The growth model became sustainable. Some people, they want to be innovative, but they can't keep the innovation alive. And so with the alignment of their strategy, right, having quality over quantity, they shut quite a few stores down, especially during the mid 2000s. And then the structure and the systems like the barista training, etc. Starbucks built a sustainable platform for international expansion, and that's the goal. The goal was to grow. But in order to grow, they had to really hone in on a few things first. I think it's home in. It's gonna drive me crazy until I figure it out. And then last but not least, reinforced cultural identity. So once again, this focus on shared values, staff development, and Schultz's leadership style, which matriculated through, we can assume matriculated through regional managers and then store managers. It helped to maintain a cohesive culture, even while scaling globally. All right. So this is high level, y'all. High level stuff here. I think at some point I want to probably do this even more justice and go a little bit deeper. I think that some of these, we can take a look at and even maybe even prioritize, just kind of looking at how this was done. If I had to take a guess at what the focus was, in 2008, kind of hit the market, I'm almost certain that this was very important here. But Schultz, understanding a little bit more about him, it might have been the brand. He definitely had a vision of what he wanted Starbucks to be. Um, and that might have been perhaps the priority. And then I don't know. Like when I think about, just like the way that, money works. I mean, this is all important, but operations efficiency is super important, especially when you have to, do cuts and things. But this is where high impact decision making comes, because even though you're thinking this, which if you're only thinking that at short term to an extent, you got to think about, well, how will we even have any customers coming, even if we had an efficient operation running post 2008, right? So definitely something to think about. But this is it, y'all. So remember McKinsey 7S framework. It should be a capital S there. Strategy, structure, systems, shared value, skills, style, and staff. And I have a hunch that you could probably use this. Not even probably. I do believe that you could use this. I guess probably and could might be the same thing, right? You can use this for your own personal life. Remember I told you that all of these frameworks and things that people might use at the C level or management level, you can use this, or a lot of it can be applicable personally. Any misalignment in your life? Anything that you need to change in your personal life? You may not need to have buy-in from everyone else, but maybe you need buy-in for yourself. I mean, there's some limiting beliefs that you need to get rid of so that you can choose to change. Any improvements that need to be made that won't necessarily impact negatively, or just kind of knock into other things. Now we know that everything is kind of interconnected, right? But to do it in a way where it's not going to strain a different system. So like focusing on your health shouldn't be a strain in, let's say, your work, right? If you have a job. And so, containing health, but then also containing, employment, containing mental. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. That is my hunch, and I'm going to stick to it. And we're going to talk about this throughout the year. All right. All right, y'all. So let me go ahead. Oh, wow. Okay. I did not even realize that happened. Yeah, let's go ahead and remove that. All right. Okay, y'all. So for the LinkedIn fam, I hope that you saw this insightful and helpful. I'm going to switch over now to the other streaming platforms. I will be reading the Other America by Dr. Martin Luther King as a commemoration of this day. Have a good night. That's just LinkedIn. The rest of y'all stay put if you want to still rock with me. All right, cool. So the Other America, I'm actually pulling this from the crmvet.org website. It is the Civil Rights Movement Archive. All right. So I'm just going to read the transcript. No commentary or anything. I'm just going to read it straight through, and then I'm going to call it a night, y'all. Members of the faculty and members of the student body of this great institution of learning, ladies and gentlemen, now there are several things that one could talk about before such a large, concerned, and enlightened audience. There are so many problems facing our nation and our world that one could just take off anywhere. But today I would like to talk mainly about the race problems, since I'll have to rush right out and go to New York and talk about Vietnam tomorrow. And I've been talking about it a great deal this week and weeks before that. But I'd like to use a subject from which to speak this afternoon, the Other America. And I use this subject because there are literally two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation. And in a sense, this America is flowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their minds, and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, millions of people experience every day the opportunity of having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the ebulliency, the ebulliency of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. In this America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions. They find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. Little children in this other America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental skies. As we look at this other America, we see it as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams. Many people of various backgrounds live in this other America. Some are Mexican Americans, some are Puerto Ricans, some are Indians, some happen to be from other groups, and millions of them are Appalachian whites. But probably the largest group in this other America, in proportion to its size in the population, is the American Negro. The American Negro finds himself living in a triple ghetto: a ghetto of race, a ghetto of poverty, a ghetto of human misery. So what are we seeking to do in the civil rights movement is to deal with this problem, of the two Americas. We are seeking to make America one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, let me say that the struggle for civil rights and the struggle to make these two Americas one America is much more difficult today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. For about a decade, or maybe 12 years, we've struggled all across the South in glorious struggles to get rid of legal, overt segregation and all of the humiliation surrounded that system of segregation. In a sense, this was a struggle for decency. We could not go to a lunch counter in so many instances and get a hamburger or a cup of coffee. We could not make use of public accommodations. Public transportation was segregated, and often we had to sit in the back end within transportation. Pardon me, everyone. Give me 1 second. I think I skipped this section here. Certainly they were difficult. Okay. Public transportation was segregated, and often we had to sit in the back. And within transportation within cities, we often had to stand over empty seats because sections were reserved for whites only. We did not have the right to vote in so many areas of the South, and the struggle was to deal with these problems. And certainly, they were difficult problems. They were humiliating conditions. By the thousands, we protested these conditions. We made it clear that it was ultimately more honorable to accept jail cell experiences than to accept segregation and humiliation. By the thousands, students and adults decided to sit in at segregated lunch counters to protest conditions there. When they were sitting at those lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and seeking to take the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Many things were gained as a result of these years of struggle. In 1964, the Civil Rights Bill came into being after the Birmingham movement, which did a great deal to subpoena the conscience of a large segment of the nation to appear before the judgment seat of morality on the whole question of civil rights. After the Selma movement in 1965, we were able to get a voting rights bill. And all of these things represented strides. But we must see that the struggle today is much more difficult. It's more difficult today because we are struggling now for genuine equality. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee a livable income and a good, solid job. It's much easier to guarantee the right to vote than it is to guarantee the right to live in sanitary, decent housing conditions. It's much easier to integrate a public park than it is to make genuine, quality, integrated education a reality. And so today we are struggling for something which says we demand genuine equality. It's not merely a struggle against extremist behavior toward Negroes. And I'm convinced that many of the very people who supported us in the struggle in the South are not willing to go all the way now. I can see this in a very difficult and painful way. In Chicago, the last year I have lived and worked, where I have lived and worked, some of the people who came quickly to march with us in Selma and Birmingham weren't active around Chicago. And I came to see that so many people who supported morally and even financially what we were doing in Birmingham and Selma were really outraged against the extremist behavior of Bull Connor and Jim Clark toward Negroes rather than believing in genuine equality for Negroes. And I think this is what I've got. And I think this is what we've got to see now. And this is what makes the struggle much more difficult. So as a result of this, we see many problems existing today that are growing more difficult. It's something that's often overlooked. But Negroes generally live in worse slums today than 20 or 25 years ago. In the North, schools are more segregated today than they were in 1954 when the Supreme Court's decision on desegregation was rendered. Economically, the Negro is worse off today than he was 15 and 20 years ago. And so the unemployment rate among whites at one time was about the same as the unemployment rate among Negroes. But today, the unemployment rate among Negroes is twice that of whites. And the average income of the Negro is today 50% less than whites. As we look at these problems, we see them growing and developing every day. We see the fact that the Negro economically is facing a depression in his everyday life that is more staggering than the depression of the 30s. The unemployment rate of the nation as a whole is about 4%. Statistics would say from the Labor Department that among Negroes, it's about 8.4%. But these are the persons who are in the labor market, who still go to employment agencies to seek jobs. And so they can be calculated. The statistics can be gotten because they are still somehow in the labor market. But there are hundreds of thousands of Negroes who have given up. They've lost hope. They've come to feel that life is a long and desolate corridor for them with no exit sign. And so they no longer go to look for a job. There are those who would estimate that these persons, who are called in capitals, discouraged persons, these 6 or 7% in the Negro community, that means that unemployment among Negroes may well be 16%. Among Negro youth in some of our larger urban areas, it goes to 30 and 40%. So you can see what I mean when I say that in the Negro community, there's a major tragic and staggering depression that we face in our everyday lives. Now, the other thing we've got to come to see now that many of us didn't see too well during the last 10 years, that is that racism is still alive in American society and much more widespread than we realized. And we must see racism for what it is. It is a myth of the superior and the inferior race. It is the false and tragic notion that one particular group, one particular race, is responsible for all the progress and all the insights in the total flow of history. And the theory that another group or another race is totally depraved, innately impure, and innately inferior. In the final analysis, Racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion. He ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. This is tragedy of racism. This is the tragedy of racism because the ultimate logic is genocide. If one says that I'm not good enough to live next door to him, one says that I'm not good enough to eat at a lunch counter or to have a good, decent job or to go to school with him merely because of my race, he is saying consciously or unconsciously that I do not deserve to exist. To use a philosophical analogy here, racism is not based on some empirical generalization. It is based rather on an ontological affirmation. It is not the assertion that certain people are behind culturally or otherwise because of environmental conditions. It is the affirmation that the very being of a people is inferior. And this is a great tragedy of it. I submit that however unpleasant it is, we must honestly see and admit that racism is still deeply rooted all over America. It is still deeply rooted in the North, and it's still deeply rooted in the South. And this leads me to say something about another discussion that we hear a great deal, and that the so-called white backlash, he puts that in quotes. I would like to honestly say to you that the white backlash is merely a new name for an old phenomenon. It's not something that just came into being because of shouts of Black power or because Negroes engaged in riots in Watts, for instance. The fact is that the state of California voted a fair housing bill out of existence before anybody shouted Black power or before anybody rioted in Watts. It may well be that shouts of Black power and riots in Watts, in the Harlems, and the other areas are the consequences of the white backlash rather than the cause of them. What is necessary to see is that there has never been a single solid monistic determined commitment on the part of the vast majority of white Americans on the whole question of civil rights and on the whole question of racial equality. This is something that truth impels all men of goodwill to admit. It is said on the Statue of Liberty, I think it's on the Statue of Liberty, that America is a home of exiles. It doesn't take us long to realize that America has been the home of white exiles from Europe, but it has not evinced the same kind of maternal care and concern for its Black exiles from Africa. It is no wonder that in one of his sorrow songs, the Negro could sing out, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child." What great estrangement, what great sense of rejection caused a people to emerge with such metaphor as they looked over their lives. What I'm trying to get across is that our nation has constantly taken a positive step forward on the question of racial justice and racial equality, but over and over again, at the same time, it made certain backward steps. And this has been the persistence of the so-called white backlash. In 1863, the Negro was freed from the bondage of physical slavery, but at the same time, the nation refused to give him land to make that freedom meaningful. At that same period, America was given millions of acres of land in the West and Midwest, which meant that America was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor that would make it possible to grow and develop, and refused to give the economic floor to its Black peasants, so to speak. This is why Frederick Douglass could say that emancipation for the Negro was freedom to hunger, freedom to the winds and rains of heaven, freedom without roofs to cover their heads. He went on to say that it was freedom without bread to eat, freedom without land to cultivate. It was freedom and famine at the same time. But it does not stop there. In 1875, the nation passed a civil rights bill that refused to enforce it. In 1964, the nation passed a weaker civil rights bill and even to this day, that bill has not been totally enforced in all of its dimensions. The nation heralded a new day of concern for the poor, for the poverty stricken, for the disadvantaged, and brought into being a poverty bill. And at the same time, it put such little money into the program that it was hardly, and still remains hardly, a good skirmish against poverty. White politicians in suburbs talk eloquently against open housing, and in the same breath contend that they are not racist. And all of this, and all of these things tell us that America has been backlashing on the whole question of basic constitutional and God-given rights for Negroes and other disadvantaged groups for more than 300 years. So these conditions exist. So these conditions, existence of widespread poverty, slums, and of tragic consumptions in schools and other areas of life, all of these things have brought about a great deal of despair and a great deal of desperation, a great deal of disappointment, and even bitterness in the Negro communities. And today, all of our cities confront huge problems. All of our cities are potentially powder kegs as a result of the continued existence of these conditions. Many in moments of anger, many in moments of deep bitterness, engage in riots. Let me say, as I've always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve. That in a real sense is that in a real sense, it is impractical for the Negro to even think of mounting a violent revolution in the United States. So I will continue to condemn this. I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way, and continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is necessary for me to be as rigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. Now, let me go on to say that if we are to deal with all of the problems that I've talked about, and if we are to bring America to the point that we have one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, there are certain things that we must do. The job ahead must be massive and positive. We must develop massive action programs all over the United States in order to deal with the problems that I've mentioned. Now, in order to develop these massive action programs, we've got to get rid of one or two false notions that continue to exist in our society. One is the notion that only time can solve the problem of racial injustice. I'm sure you've heard this idea. It is the notion that that there is something in the very flow of time that will miraculously cure all evils. And I've heard this over and over again. There are those, and they are often sincere people who say, "Okay, y'all, I need to increase the size of this text." Oof, my eyes are getting. Y'all, give me 1 second. Man, my eyes are killing me. Okay. The only problem with this is that it doesn't it doesn't the text doesn't wrap. So um okay. My apologies, y'all. Um we're talking about massive action plans. Mm, okay. I'm going to start from here. So now let me go on to say that if we are to deal with all of the problems that I've talked about, and if America is to the point that we have one nation indivisible with liberty and justice for all, there are certain things that we must do. The job ahead must be massive and positive. Okay, so I said that one already. There are those, and they are often sincere people who say to Negroes and their allies in the white community that we should slow up and just be nice and patient and continue to pray. And in 100 or 2 years, the problem will work itself out because only time can solve the problem. I think there is an answer to that myth, and it is that time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme rightists in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. Okay. I lost my place again, y'all. Hold on. I'm killing momentum here. 1 second. Mm, I'm getting cross. Next time I'm gonna find a better one to read from. Okay, answer to the myth. There we go. Um, I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme rightists in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of the bad people and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. And without this work, without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so we must help time, and we must realize that time is always right to do right. The time is always right to do right. Now there's another notion that gets out. It's around everywhere. It's in the South, it's in the North, it's in California, it's all over our nation. It's the notion that legislation can't solve the problem. It can't do anything in this area. And those who project this argument contend that you've got to change the heart, and you can't change the heart through legislation. Now, I would be the first one to say that there is a real need for a lot of heart changing in our country. And I believe in changing the heart. I preach about it. I believe in the need for conversion in many instances and regeneration, to use theological terms. And I would be the first to say that if the race problem in America is to be solved, the white person must treat the Negro right, not merely because of the law says it, but because it's natural, because it's right, and because the Negro is his brother. And so I realize that if we are to have a truly integrated society, men and women will have to rise to the majestic heights of being obedient to the unenforceable. But after saying this, let me say another thing, which gives the other side. And that is that although it may be true that morality cannot be legislated, behavior can be regulated. Even though it may be true that the law cannot change the heart, it can restrain the heartless. Even though it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, it can restrain him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important also. And so while the law may not change the hearts of men, it can and it does change the habits of men. And when you begin to change the habits of men, pretty soon, the attitudes will be changed. Pretty soon, the hearts will be changed. And I'm convinced that we still need strong civil rights legislation. There's a bill before Congress right now to have a national or federal open housing bill, a federal law declaring discrimination in housing unconstitutional, and also a bill to make the administration of justice real all over the country. Now, nobody can doubt the need for this. Nobody can doubt the need if he thinks about the fact that since 1963, some 50 Negroes and white civil rights workers have been brutally murdered in the state of Mississippi alone, and not a single person has been convicted for these dastardly crimes. Yet, or there have been some indictments, but no one has been convicted. And so there's a need for a federal law dealing with the whole question of the administration of justice. There's a need for fair housing laws all over our country. And it is tragic indeed that Congress last year allowed this bill to die. And when that bill died in Congress, a bit of democracy died. A bit of our commitment to justice died. If it happens again in this session of Congress, a greater degree of our commitment to democratic principles will die. And I can see no more dangerous trend in our country than the constant developing of predominantly Negro central cities ringed by white suburbs. This is only inviting social disaster. The only way this problem will be solved is by the nation taking a strong hand, and by state governments taking a strong stand against housing segregation and against discrimination in all of these areas. Now, there's another thing that I'd like to mention as I talk about the massive action program. And time will not permit me to go into specific programmatic action to any great degree. But it must be realized now that the Negro cannot solve the problems by himself. There again, there are those who always say to Negroes, why don't you do something for yourself? Why don't you lift yourselves up? Why don't you lift yourselves by your own bootstraps? And we hear this over and over again. Now, certainly there are many things that we must do for ourselves and that only we can do for ourselves. Certainly we must develop within a sense of dignity and self-respect and that nobody else can give us. A sense of manhood, a sense of personhood, a sense of not being ashamed of our heritage, a sense of not being ashamed of our color. It is wrong and tragic of the Negro ever to allow himself to be ashamed of the fact that he is Black or ashamed of the fact that his ancestral home is Africa. And so there is a great deal that the Negro can do to develop self-respect. There's a great deal. Oh, man. By the way, I'm not getting emotional, y'all. It's my allergies. There's a great deal that the Negro must do and can do to amass political and economic power within his own community and by using his own resources. And we must do certain things for ourselves, but this must not negate the fact and cause the nation to overlook the fact that the Negro cannot solve the problem himself. A man was on a plane with me some weeks ago, and he came up to me and said, the problem, Dr. King, that I see with all of you, with what all of you are doing is that every time I see you and other Negroes, you're protesting and you aren't doing anything for yourselves. And he went on to tell me that he was very poor at one time, and he was able to make by doing something for himself. Why don't you teach your people, he said, to lift themselves by their own bootstraps? And then he went on to say other groups faced disadvantages, the Irish, the Italian, and he went down the line. And I said to him that it does not help the Negro. It only deepens his frustration. And I said to him that it does not help the Negro. It only deepens his frustration upon feeling insensitive people to say to him that other ethnic groups who migrated over or were immigrants to this country less than 100 years ago or so have gotten beyond him, and he came here some 344 years ago. And I went on to remind him that the Negro came to this country involuntarily in chains, while others came voluntarily. I went on to remind him that no other racial group has been a slave on American soil. I went on to remind him that the other problem we have faced over the years is that this society placed a stigma on the color of Negro and the color of his skin because he was Black. Doors were closed to him that were not closed to other groups. And I finally said to him that it's a nice thing to say to people that you ought to lift yourself by your own bootstraps. But it is cruel, and it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And the fact is that millions of Negroes, as a result of centuries of denial and neglect, have been left bootless. They find themselves impoverished aliens in this affluent society, and there's a great deal that the society can and must do if the Negro is to gain the economic security that he needs. One day I'm going to read this over y'all because I realize that I'm getting a little jaded. Oof. It's really the color and the font. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. Now, one of the answers, it seems to me, is a guaranteed annual income, a guaranteed minimum income for all people and for our families of our country. It seems to me that the civil rights movement must now begin to organize for the guaranteed annual income begin to organize people all over the country and mobilize forces so that we can bring the attention of our nation this need. And this is something which I believe will go a long way toward dealing with the Negro's economic problem and the economic problem which many other poor people confront in our nation. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk about Vietnam, but I can't make a speech without mentioning some of the forefront with some of the problems that we face, because I think this war has diverted attention from civil rights. It has strengthened the forces of reaction in our country and has brought to the forefront the military industrial complex that even President Eisenhower warned us against at one time. And above all, it is destroying human lives. It's destroying the lives of thousands of the young promising men of our nation. It's destroying the lives of little boys and little girls in Vietnam. But one of the greatest things that this war is doing to us in civil rights is that it is allowing the great society, capital G, capital S, to be shot down on the battlefields of Vietnam every day. And I submit this afternoon that we can end poverty in the United States. Our nation has the resources to do it. The national gross product of America will rise to the astounding figure of some $780 billion this year. We have the resources. The question is whether our nation has the will. And I submit that if we spend $35 billion a year to fight an ill-considered war in Vietnam and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, our nation can spend billions of dollars to put God's children on their own 2 feet right here on earth. This actually kind of feels a little apropos, don't it? Because we're trying to go to Mars. Let me say another thing that's more in the realm of the spirit, I guess. That is, if we are to go on in the days ahead and make true brotherhood a reality, it is necessary for us to realize more than ever before that the destinies of the Negro and the white man are tied together. Now, there are still a lot of people who don't realize this. The racists still don't realize this. But it is a fact now that Negroes and whites are tied together, and we need each other. The Negro needs the white man to save him from his fear, and the white man needs the Negro to save him from his guilt. We are tied together in so many ways: our language, our music, our cultural patterns, our material prosperity, and even our food and our amalgam of white and black, or actually it says amalgam of black and white. So there can be no separate black path to power and fulfillment that does not intersect white groups. There can be no separate white path to power and fulfillment short of social disaster. It does not recognize the need of sharing the power with black aspirations for freedom and justice. We must come to see now that integration is not merely a romantic or aesthetic something where you merely add color to a still predominantly white power structure. Integration must be seen also in political terms where this is shared power, where black men and white men share power together to build a new and a great nation. In a real sense, we are all caught in this. Listen, for somebody that had to leave, man, in a real sense, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. John Donne probably placed it years ago in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And he goes on toward the end to say, any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And so we are all in the same situation. The salvation of the Negro will mean the salvation of the white man. The destruction of life and of the ongoing progress of the Negro will mean the destruction of the ongoing progress of the nation. Now let me say finally, all right, Doc. Now let me say finally that we have difficulties ahead, but I haven't despaired. Somehow I maintain hope in spite of hope. I've talked about the difficulties and how hard the problems will be as we tackle them, but I want to close by saying this afternoon that I still have faith in the future, and I still believe that these problems can be solved. And so I will not join anyone who will say that we still can't develop a coalition of conscience. I realize and understand the discontent and the agony and the disappointment and even the bitterness of those who feel that whites in America cannot be trusted. And I would be the first to say that there are all too many who are still guided by the racist ethos. And I'm still convinced that there are still many white persons of goodwill. And I'm happy to say that I see them every day in the student generation who cherish democratic principles and justice above principle, and who will stick to the cause of justice and the cause of civil rights and the cause of peace throughout the days ahead. And so I refuse to despair. I think we're going to achieve our freedom because however much America strays away from the ideals of justice, the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored here without wages. We made cotton king. They made cotton king. They built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions. And yet out of a bottomless vitality, they continued to grow and develop. And I say that if the inexpressible cruelties of slavery couldn't stop us, the opposition we now face, including the so-called white backlash, will surely fail. We're going to win our freedom because both the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demands. And so I can still sing, we shall overcome. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discourse of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, Black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants, Catholics, will be able to join hands and live together as brothers and sisters all over this great nation. That will be a great day. That will be a great tomorrow. In the words of the scripture, to speak symbolically, that will be the day when the morning stars will sing together and the sons of God will shout for joy. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 1967. All right, y'all. That was quite the speech. I didn't realize that the speech was that long, actually. I mean, I'd seen it, I read it, but man, I didn't realize it was, I guess, reading it out loud, didn't realize how long it took. It was about like 45 minutes. It feels like maybe even a little longer than that. All right, y'all. I hope that you are, oh man, allergies are killing me. Not emotional, but geez, Louise, I think it's just like talking. It's like, just starting to run and I have no tissue or anything around me. But listen, you guys, McKinsey's 7S framework, and somehow it probably would, if I found a way, there could probably be some 7S framework in Martin Luther King's speech, which now I'm curious. I'm curious to see what's in there and how we could probably make that work. Because, I like connecting things, but I'm not going to force it. Have a good night. See you on the next stream.